And let's join together in a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam,
asher
asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
We are in Leviticus. We're up to chapter 26, verse 15. So you'll want to locate that text in whatever book you're using. Okay.
Would you say it again, please?
26:15. Nice to see you, David. You're here just in time. We're just jumping in with Leviticus chapter 26, verse 15. So we saw all of the blessings that are going to come to us in the words of the parsha, im bechukotai telechu, if we follow God's path. Now we have the much, much, much longer section of the curses. And given everything that is going on surrounding us in our culture right now, we may be able to relate to the curses a lot more than the blessings. So we saw verse 14, just to review, if you do not obey me and do not observe all my laws. And now here we are on verse 15. So this is where we're beginning. If you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenant. I'm just looking at the Hebrew for a second. Im bechukotai tim asu. So it's exactly the parallel. We started off im bechukotai telechu, if you walk in my paths. Im bechukotai tim asu, if you reject my path and spurn my mishpatim. It's interesting because we've seen in many other locations these two different references to categories of mitzvot, chukim and mishpatim, and classically understood as positive versus negative commandments, or commandments that make intuitive sense versus commandments that are unique and kind of unfathomable, things that wouldn't come to us intuitively. Mishpatim, which is what's referenced in this verse, are those commandments that even if the Torah didn't give them to us, we could still figure them out. Things like don't steal, don't murder. So if you can't even grasp and appreciate and follow the basic laws that everyone should know, and break my covenant, so here's going to be the consequences in verse 16. So it's translated here, I'm reading the Eitz Chaim, the Conservative Movement translation. I will in turn do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you. I have another translation right here that says, I will appoint terror over you. So misery and terror are kind of different translations. Anybody have another translations besides misery or terror?
Stone is saying, I will assign upon you panic.
Panic, so that's kind of in the terror mode.
In the terror realm, and then it gets worse from there.
Yeah, then it gets worse from there, but I want to just stop there for a moment, because terror, panic, I think, as I said, these are ideas that we can relate to very strongly right in the current moment. I think there is a lot of terror, a lot of panic, a lot of fear that many of us are feeling. We were feeling it just about the virus, and then when we add the rioting and looting that's going on, it increases our just being completely and totally unsettled. So I think we can really grasp the power of just this very first, as we're putting our toe into the curses here, we can just really understand what it is like to live in fear, to live in terror, to live with a sense of panic, to never feel safe and secure. Terry, I see, and then Barry K.
Barry S.
Terry, you need to unmute.
Just a
Which-
personal,
Terry.
just a personal response. This is the first week, and it started on Thursday, that I have felt my anxiety skyrocketing. I mean, I'm up a couple times in the night. I am very unsettled. I am frightened. I see clouds everywhere, and I feel like I'm never going to leave my house ever again. I don't know.
It is. So I'm learning what to
So
do.
who's got the background noise?
That's pretty item right now. Yellow squash.
Where's that coming
Any
from?
suggestions on those?
All right, I think I'm going to mute everyone. And if you have a comment, I think Barry Singer wanted to say something, just please unmute yourself.
So this overall panic and terror, and I want to put it in contemporary in the last week, which is that for so much of the African American community, this is the way they live. This is their normal, to paraquote President Obama. There's a statistic that's a horrible one. A black male in this country has a 1 in 1,000 chance of being killed by a police officer.
Mm.
So, you know, that's been their level of panic. And I think we're getting our own level of panic in a kind of different way.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you. So what's going to happen with this terror, with this fear? You're going to also experience consumption and fever. So it's going to manifest as physical illness, which causes the eyes to pine and the body to languish. So kind of very parallel to what we're experiencing right now. And then you shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. We saw that in the blessings, food security was a primary concern. And now we're seeing the opposite. The curse is that you will not have food security. You'll face a situation where, and it's not even a natural phenomenon that there's going to be no rain or locusts. It's your enemies are going to eat it. You're going to plant, and someone else is going to reap the reward of what you planted. And you know, Barry, when you talk about that sense of fear, I think on the other side of it, this is the experience of shopkeepers now who innocently are watching the seeds that they sowed be destroyed, and having others reap the benefit. You know, here I built this business, and now through no fault of my own, was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and others are destroying what I sowed. Willa?
In this morning's paper, there was an article about a Korean shopkeeper, an ice cream place in the Arizona center, and they were put out of business by the riots in Los Angeles, and they thought they would come to Phoenix, and now it's the daughter who's running the shop, apparently, and the place has been looted and it's a mess, and she doesn't know what will happen. So, that's all.
Felix?
I'm wondering if any of the scholars have interpreted this in a more figurative sense, not concretely in terms of food and food supply, but in terms of offspring and children and the eating of the children would be the stealing of the children, or the forced conversions of our children.
So we're going to get to that very specifically in a few verses here among the curses, much more graphic, specifically talking about starvation and cannibalism that is going to occur. So this is just the beginning of the curses. I will read to you from the Eitz Chaim commentary, which kind of does interpret it a little bit metaphorically. So this commentary, which is a reflection on this whole section of the Torah, which is called Tochecha, the Rebuke. The sages called this section the Tochecha, reproach, based on the phrase sevenfold for your sins. The Sefer sees the process of falling away from God's ordained path occurring in 7 steps, hinted at by proof texts in the Torah's warning. 1, people will stop studying Torah. 2, without the foundation of study, they will come to see the commandments as matters of personal choice rather than moral obligation. 3, they will resent people who do study and practice and who make them feel guilty for not doing so. 4, they will try to stop others from fulfilling the commandments so they will feel less guilty themselves. 5, they will deny that the commandments come from God. 6, they will deny the existence of a covenant between God and Israel. And 7, they will deny the existence of God. So could somebody read us verse 17?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee though none pursues. You want more?
No. I want to take them one step at a time. And again, to Barry's point, what must it be like to live with that fear? You can't even call it paranoia, because they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean somebody's not out to get you. So just that sense that you're always being pursued, even when no one's there. You can't relax.
If that looking over your shoulder, constantly checking what's behind you, what's in front of you, and every step is taken to avoid a real pit of danger. And
I think that's part of the challenge of this COVID situation, is wondering if this is how we're going to feel forever, if we've just been so deeply impacted and changed. Is it comprehensible that there will be a time when we can go to a store and grab a grocery cart and not hope that it was wiped down before we touched it, when we can meet a friend, sit next to them in a restaurant and give them a hug without a second thought?
Can I jump into this? I have, in looking at these from the beginning, from 14, it seems like the suggestion is that you may chafe at the rules I've given you. God is saying, you may not be happy that I've given you all these commandments and that I expect and demand that you follow them, but these rules give you structure. And the structure, while it may feel binding, the structure is also reassuring. The structure is an embrace. And in order to maintain that embrace, God's embrace, you're expected to follow my commandments. In the absence of that structure and that embrace, you have precisely the anomie, the chaos that you're describing. And if you wake up every day and you no longer have any sense of at 9 o'clock I do this, and at 10 o'clock I do that, and at 11 o'clock I can choose between these two, but I have choices. For those who say, I don't want to be restricted, understand that the absence of the things you find restrictive also means that you're going to be floundering, and you're going to have no sense of having a floor under your feet.
So, so we just celebrated Shavuot. Shavuot is the celebration of receiving Torah. And we created a bridge from Passover to Shavuot by counting, everyday counting. We're looking forward to this event of receiving Torah. What's the connection between those two? Exactly what you're saying, Becca. Yes, Passover is the celebration of freedom, and Shavuot is the celebration of that which gives structure to our freedom. The other element of what you're saying is the reliance that we have to have on each other to maintain that social order. And I think that's what we're missing as well, is the security of knowing that others have the same goal of the well-being of the community. And we've lost that faith in that structure. David, are you raising your hand? Yes, please.
I see this as happening over and over again since the Bible. And to go back to the 60s, there were the riots in the 60s. All of this happened before. And obviously, it's going to happen again. The Bible, the Torah, is not a stagnant thing. It's a living Torah.
Well, I'm going to have to come from a very different angle as usual. If this is the Torah we're studying, the Torah was given to us, the Jewish people. Therefore, the breaking of the rules applies only to us. What's happening to the rest of the world is irrelevant. Or it's a universal document and this applies to everybody, so why aren't they obeying the rules that we've been given? That being said, if it's the rules we've been given and the structure we've been given, then only the people will always follow those rules and structures. As Reform, we're not always following the so-called rules and structures of halakha. But even the people who follow them the most have also been hit heaviest by the coronavirus. So how do you balance this out, saying, this is given to us, the Jewish people, we need to follow this, otherwise things are going to go bad for us, yet the very groups that we do not follow, who say they follow all the rules, they're hit worse than most of the, shall we say, Reform or unaffiliated Jews. So to take this literally, that every time we don't follow a rule, we're going to get punished, gets to be a little problematic. It's like there are mitzvot that I would choose to observe and carry, but does that mean I get selectively punished by God? Is there an accounting agency that says you do this and you get that? So it's very difficult for me to say, because you've been cursed, you get this. And two, when I saw the word consumptive, when I read it, it meant more like, to me, my reading, a health, a disease.
Yes.
Yeah, a health disease rather than a community. And when it came to sowing, it was like the seeds, and the next one seemed to confirm that warriors or the enemies would take your property and take your grain, or make you harvest your grain for them. So just my reading of it.
Yeah, and I don't imagine that there are too many of us who we're seeing right now who are understanding this in a literal sense, that we should do mitzvot in order to reap a reward, and that if we don't do mitzvot, that we will be punished through this means. So I think, yes, we're studying the text, but we're understanding that this, for most of us, this does not reflect our theology. Owen.
I want to come back to Becca's point, which is almost always right on target about community. And I think this is a particularly good example of this. That the mitzvot, this is the deal I'm giving you, is about creating a functioning community. And what keeps us working together and it's not about individuals being punished, it's about the community creating a working society, a working agriculture, a working military, a working anything. And and essentially what this is saying is if you take it out of the context of a community, nobody has the ability to protect themselves in all these areas. It takes a village. Thank you, Becca, as always.
You're welcome.
Sarah Lee? You have to unmute, Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, either on the lower left-hand corner of your computer.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You have to, it's a matter of self-control. If we don't have rules, we lose some kind of feeling of being in control. To take it right here where we're living, they have asked us, everybody, to please wear masks. And Laura and I have been talking about that at different times because we'll say, why isn't everybody, most of us are wearing masks. There are people that just don't. And that is no self-control there, no thought of somebody else. I think you have to have some kind of feeling of being in control. I have one grandson who is a ADHD, and he has no control at all. I mean, he gets a thought and he doesn't think it through. And that is they keep saying it's because he has this ADHD. And I keep wondering, how can you control it? Somewhere he's got to learn some self-control. And I've said to him, you've got to stop before you do something. Think it through. But he is out in the open. So it's just a matter of, my grandparents always used to say, "Mekenzach nicht verlieren sich." You don't lose control of yourself. You know who you are and where you are and what you're doing at that moment. And I think this is what they're trying to tell us. And I wonder too, this is written, 3,000 years ago? What was going on at that time that brought this listing here? So there must have been a very unruling kind of society that they were trying to mold into a positive society.
Well, the context here is the Israelites had just left a period of hundreds of years of enslavement where there was no personal choice about how one spent one's time. The structure was provided externally by slave masters. So now the question is, okay, as Becca was saying before, you have freedom. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to control yourself and create a just and fair society? I saw Sherry and then Terry.
This is perhaps hearkening back to earlier portions that we've read, but I'm troubled by the notion that these restrictions, these guidelines are for Jews only. If we exist as an island, we can't function in the larger world. But this is talking I think it's talking specifically to Jews who have just been released, as you said, from slavery, who are trying to figure out how do we as a nation go forward. But why is this not considered a holistic entreaty?
Well, for sure, Sherry, if there's a prohibition of murder, it doesn't mean you can murder non-Jews, but you can't murder Israelites. So certainly some of the mitzvot are intended more broadly. Are you familiar at all? Let me put in the chat with the concept of the Noahide laws. So there's a concept of the 7 laws of the descendants of Noah, which is all of us. So we as Jews have the chutzpah to suggest that there are 7 mitzvahs that apply to every single human being. And then there are 606 that are just specifically mitzvot for Jews. But to give an example, the Torah tells us, we're well familiar, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Who is your neighbor? Well, rabbinic commentators are divided about that. There are those who say that means your fellow Israelite, and there are those who say it applies to any human being. So it's not as straightforward as we might think. But if you look up the 7 Noahide laws, you'll see that though that is our idea of a universal foundation of law and social structure. And one of those, apropos of our current moment, is to establish a legal system. You have to have a court system that's fair and functional and that can protect the public safety. And if you don't have that, then no society, according to this principle, can function. So it's interesting. And a few of the principles are theological, which is also kind of interesting, because if we were writing our 7 fundamental legal principles, I don't know that we would include theological principles. I think, Terry, you wanted to jump in, and then Myra.
First of all, knowing that saying this is going to erase whatever I was thinking before, just in response, sorry, to Sherry. The Christian Bible, in the published book that every Christian has, is about 75% the Old Testament. So everything we're reading, they have adopted as their own. The same thing goes for Islam, that the Old Testament is part of that too. And so these principles are fairly universal in most religious groups today, with the exception being, and it's my ignorance perhaps, rather more than that it doesn't exist, is in the Eastern religions. And I'm not sure that they work the same way. But I know that Christianity and Islam feel that these are their rules as well, although they don't use them explicitly as much as we do. I can't remember. I knew this would happen. It's gone. It might come back.
All right, Myra and Lisa.
Okay. I was going to go back further than Noah, but Noah is a good example. We are all brothers and sisters. God created man and woman, and there's a little bit of God in every one of us. So I don't care if you're Asian or Ethiopian or whatever. My feeling is that God is in every one of us, and we are all brothers and sisters. And maybe it's up to us, the Jews, to spread the word of God, but in peaceful ways. And that's why we have here in the United States mostly the laws of God, our Torah, like the 10 Commandments, like we have the juries, the appellate, the court system, the legislator, and the administrator. It really comes from our Torah. And we are all related, all related. And God said, if you do not obey, I'll do something.
So, yes, the Midrash asked the question, why did God begin, the Torah begin the creation with only one person, so that no person could say, my ancestors were greater than your ancestors? Yes, we all come from the same ancestor. Lisa, were you gonna jump in?
Yeah, just briefly, you know, I don't, when I think of societies across the world and across time, I don't think I think every society, no matter its faith tradition or outside of its faith traditions, you know, I think most societies, if not all societies, abhor murder, abhor theft. It just seems, since we all diverged from the common ancestor, from the chimpanzee, and became human beings, that, you know, that we have, A, that we've killed each other, and B, that we abhor that we kill each other.
Yeah, just as we have that common ancestor in Adam, we have that common ancestor in Cain, who, you know, kills his brother almost immediately upon entering into human history. Barry Singer, you're usually our quick research person. You want to just do a quick Google search of the Noahide laws and pop those into the chat for those who may be
Sure.
not familiar with them?
We'll see a link in a couple of moments.
Thank you so much. So let's continue reading. So, Terry, can you read 18, 19, and 20? They kind of go together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, so that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit.
Wow. So this is what I was saying, you know, before we had no food because our enemies ate it. Now we have no food because we can't even have functioning agriculture. The land won't work the way we need it to work. But you notice that it starts off verse 19. I'll break your pride. So those of us who study Musar know that humility is the foundational midah. When you start studying Musar, the first thing you're going to study is humility. And again, looking at next week's Parsha, what is Moses' reaction when his sister and brother denounce his wife? We're told he was the most humble person who ever lived. So rather than striking back in anger and defensiveness, he is able to respond to this attack from a place of humility. And of all of the midot where we are constantly enjoined to look for that middle path, that does not apply with humility, because there's such a temptation to arrogance that we have to err on the side of humility. And if we can't become humble, act humbly on our own, so what we hear here is that God will find ways to humble us. Yes, Lisa.
You know, and that just, you know, it reminds me of that incident earlier in the life of Moses where he murders. And, you know, you have to wonder, or at least I wonder, how much that affected him throughout his life, that, you know, he did that thing, and now he knows how to stay his hand.
Mm-hmm. who was talking earlier about Willa, about self-control. He's learned that even in the cause of justice, you still need to exercise some self-control, which I think is, the challenge of many of us as we're trying to understand what's going on with the looting that we're experiencing. We're understanding that people are hungry for justice, and that is expressing itself through violence. And yet we would like to see that lesson that Moses learned of, okay, as angry as I may be, I can't act out. I have to be able to control myself and find legal ways of expressing that hostility. Terry.
I'm not a literalist in terms of the text, but these are the times that could make me a literalist. I feel like we are living in this, what did you call it? What's the name of the period or the section?
Tochecha.
Yeah, we're living in the Tochecha right now. I feel like every single thing they've described is something that we're experiencing right now. The consumption, lung diseases, and we're in the middle of this world, all over the world. They're experiencing hunger, poverty, starvation, and illness. And it's now spreading to the undeveloped world with rapid fire. I read this morning they're losing 1,000 people a day in Brazil right now.
Wow.
Dead, not cases, dead. And then you add the last verse, to the that phrase is sticking with me. It's the you shall flee though none pursue. The anxiety, the fear, and then on top of that, global warming looks a lot like leaden skies and copper earth and floods in the wrong places and all the rest of this. I'm not a literalist, but if I was, and I've said this before, and since we've started this job, if God is still sending messages, I feel like we're past the rowboat, we're past the cruise ship, and we're onto the helicopter, and we still haven't grabbed hold of what we need to do to turn this fucking thing around. Pardon my French.
Yeah, no worries. So Owen and Lisa want to speak. Let me just call your attention to the chat for just a moment, and then Owen, you can have the floor. So thank you so much for that, Barry. So Barry looked up for us the Noahide laws. So these are after the flood. God says, I'm not going to bring a flood anymore. I recognize, he says, interestingly, God says, I recognize that humanity is evil from their inception. I'm just making my peace with the fact that I've given people freedom of choice, and people make very poor choices, and I God can't keep stepping in order to put you all on the right path. You're just going to have to live with the consequences. And then there are some guidelines offered to Noah from which the rabbis extract, so you won't go back to Genesis and see, and these are the 7 Noahide laws, but you'll see some direction given to Noah from which the rabbis extract that these are the 7 Noahide laws. And you see that the first 2 are, as I said, theological. So don't worship idols and don't curse God. So you don't have to believe in the Jewish God, in one God, but you have to show respect to God, as it were. Murder, adultery, sexual immorality, those are the big 3. Stealing, eating flesh torn from a living animal, aver min hachai. So we know that a lot of what kashrut is about is killing animals in a way that causes the least pain and that is as compassionate as can be. So just a fundamental human operating principle that if you're going to eat an animal, first kill the animal. You cannot hack it apart while it's still alive, which I guess was a way that people in the ancient world would preserve the freshness of their food, to take the animal apart as needed. And that was considered abhorrent. And then this was the last one that I was referring to, the obligation to establish courts of justice. So every society needs to have some just system of law enforcement. And then I also posted for you, Terry, the term is Tochecha, which is translated as rebuke or reproach. And, I teach this to our bar and bat mitzvah kids because, of course, this is a big theme in the prophets. So as they're studying their Haftorah, I talk about different themes in the Haftorah. And I really struggled with how could I make this make sense to 12-year-olds. What is Tochecha? And I came up with scolding. So that's God scolding us. So I think Owen and then Lisa.
So I want to come back to your, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back to your use of the word humility, which is been used twice, but in two completely different ways. So in describing Moses, the humility sounds like it's coming from inside of him. He's making a decision, he's taking in the information, and how his brother reacts, his sister, and he's incorporating that. The other, in terms of being humiliated by all of this destruction to our environment, is fear, is being taught to know what you should and shouldn't do because you're going to be punished. It might look like humility, but it's not coming from inside. The part that's coming from inside is, I don't want this bad thing, so I'm going to behave differently. It's very different from coming from inside saying, I hear that criticism, whatever, and I need to behave in a way that's consistent with my beliefs and with that belief, etc. So two different things.
Yeah, it's a very immature, fear-based perspective that we're seeing here. You do the right thing or you're going to be punished.
I just remembered what I was thinking before.
Okay, Lisa, will you yield to our colleague?
Before I forget it again, I was just going to comment that I'm not very impressed with Moses being humble as far as defending his wife is concerned. I'll just leave it there.
All right, that's fair. Yeah, Moses, for all of his great attributes, family was clearly not a priority for him. No, I seriously, I always wonder in marvelment when we read Yitro, and Yitro comes with his wife and 2 kids, and like, by the way, Moses, you're leaving town. Are you forgetting something? And I take that as a great warning about one of the pitfalls of community leadership is that your family can get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa.
Terry talking about being a literalist kind of brought to mind for me a comment Mari made on Thursday night about Ecclesiastes and, the season for everything. There's a time for every purpose and a season for everything. And it seems like we cycle through these seasons of peace and violence and, everything. Ecclesiastes reminds us that there's nothing new under the sun, and we cycle through this stuff all the time as individuals and as societies.
When will they ever learn? David?
That's another song. That's a different song.
David Flax.
Yes, I found, where did he go? Owen's comment very interesting, because if you're trying to establish a society, you have to have punishments. And I happen to follow a lot of the thinking of Professor Ellis Rifkin in the development of Jewish history. And if you're trying to bring a society together based around worship, then the priest and whoever has to say, this is what's going to happen. Because basically you had Moses leading 12 brothers with all different tribes, with all different behaviors. And you could see in the story that some wanted to do this, some stayed on the other side of the river, some wanted to. So they, whoever they may be, trying to bring it together as the spokesman for God, are using these descriptions of punishment is what's going to happen if you don't follow the community rules. But I think that's what Leviticus is a attempt to coalesce different tribes around a single idea. And two more things. Where'd you go? Just a second. Sherry B, I absolutely love your cup, your teacup or coffee cup. It's the funniest thing I have ever seen.
Good. Yeah, I know in the morning classes we have coffee and in the evening classes we have wine. So any other comments about verses 18 to 20 before we move on? And before we do, I just wanted to read one sentence from Baruch Levine's commentary, which takes a more scholarly approach, but it just
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
It occurs to me with all of our comparisons of what we're experiencing right now and what we're reading about, and I apologize since I haven't been here for 3 weeks, maybe you already talked about this, but the crisis that we're in right now is a result of accumulated disregard. So disregard for the fact that people of color have been trying to tell us for decades and decades and decades, you're not treating us fairly, you're not giving us any respect, you're trying to make us submissive, blah, 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 all of these things. And our health issues right now, have we not been attentive to all the things in the world that may have led or contributed to the coronavirus? And so right now, we're paying the price of having said, yeah, that's a little problem, but you know what, I'll ignore it right now. I have other things to do. To what extent is what we are reading a warning that, let me tell you all the things that you need to do and step by step what the consequences will be. So you cannot, I think God is trying to say, you cannot decide that a small problem can be set aside because that small problem grows exponentially and then explodes.
Yeah, step by step, Becca. I'm just looking ahead. We are in verse 20, 21. Just looking to see these curses are going to go on for more than 20 more verses.
Yeah.
So fasten your seatbelts. It does. It goes from bad to worse, from small to large to overwhelming to, I'm going to get your attention one way or another.
Right, which confirms my thought that you can't let what seems like a minor problem fester because it's going to catch up with you. And as we're talking about my favorite topic, community, thanks Owen for the shout out. But it occurs to me that we are somewhat like a Jenga game, those wooden things that are all stacked up in a tower.
Really good.
And is that a good metaphor? And you just pull out one of those and you go, hey, it's still standing, no big deal. Maybe I'll pull out this one. And boy, when that Jenga tower falls, all hell breaks loose.
I just wanted to throw a factoid in. I read in the Washington Post this morning that in Minneapolis, the median income for African Americans is $38,000, I believe, a year. And the median income for the white population is $85,000. That's a rather enormous disparity. End of story.
So I just, Becca went into my, famous collection of quotes. And here's one from Lao Tzu. This is for Terry, who's always looking for Asian sources. Take care of what is difficult while it is easy and deal with what will become big while it is yet small.
How smart. A stitch in time.
Lao Tzu. Yeah, there you go. Good. So, oh yes, Myra.
I'd like to
Yeah.
repeat what Rabbi Burke said. It's about the Shabbat for the whole world. You sent that out, or somebody sent.
Very good.
Yes. And if anybody has not read it, I think we all have to read it. We are having right now a Shabbat for the whole world.
I don't think so. I think that was 2 weeks ago, and the world has changed already.
So, you know, we've just spent many months studying the sabbatical year and the jubilee year, and the idea of the importance of taking a rest and taking a step back. And yes, Felix.
I just want to add the nuance that what you might perceive as a small problem might actually be a large problem for the other. And out of recognition for the other and maintaining a humble attitude, think about how the problem that you think is small is not small.
That's a great point, Felix. And I think that we're very dismissive in that way of little children. You know, when a small child is very agitated about something, we look at it from our adult perspective, and it can be very dismissive. It's nothing, but from the perspective of that small child, that's their whole world right there in that moment. And you're suggesting that applies to others as well. That we need to respect the perspective that someone brings to whatever their problems are. It may not be for us to decide. But Lao Tzu is directing this to the individual. You know, you take care of what is small, whatever you perceive to be small in your life before it gets out of control. But you're right, it's not for us to judge what's small or large to someone else.
I'm thinking about language and that we use in our modern society, things like get over it, suck it up. There's a million of them that we use all the time, that, yeah, things are rotten, but it's your job to just suck it up. You don't like what someone is doing, it's, you know, like it or lump it, you know. It's that whole attitude that the world has adopted as we've moved into this 21st century, the late 20th century, and now. I'm lucky enough to be 73. And at 73, I remember the 50s really well, when everyone was coming home from the war, and the doctor and the lawyer and the milkman all lived on my block. We all lived in the same houses because nobody had any money. Nobody had enough to afford it. There weren't big houses yet. And it took until probably the 60s, late 60s and 70s before things started to sort out into this, you know, class assigned housing and that kind of thing. We've been on a tube. We've been on a tear as people. And, you know, the first one, we've had expressions like, the winner is at the end of life the one with the most money, the one with they used to say in the 90s, it was the most toys. And I think we've gotten very good at indulging ourselves and ignoring everything around us that didn't fit the picture. And as far as I want to, my cousin is he's retired now, but he was a religious studies professor and did a lot of research, and he did a lot of writing. And one of the pieces that he wrote about was the other, the Jewish attitude toward the other. And at some point, Rabbi, I'd love to bring that in a little bit, because there's a lot I don't understand about it, and I would like to know more.
Do you think that your cousin might be willing to pop into our Zoom and make a guest appearance?
I would talk to him. I'd love to have that
Yeah,
happen.
why don't you ask him?
I will.
We'd love to hear from him. So we're just about out of time. I have two more things. So again, I want to go back to just, who said they were a nerd, Marcy, to like my little nerd thing here. So we just read this verse about, I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper. So Levine, in his commentary, points out that the exact same language, the exact same statement occurs in the execration of Deuteronomy 28:33. So this same term.
Oh, I see it.
Yes, there you go. And in the treaties of King Esarhaddon of Assyria, who ruled in the 7th century BCE. So apparently this was a common phrase in that culture, just like, suck it up and drive on. So in these treaties, the king's vassals are warned that they will be severely punished by the gods or the empire for any violations of the treaties. And obviously the sense of the statement is that rains will cease and the artesian springs of the earth will become dry. So just to point out that that phrase is reflective of and borrowed from the culture of that time in history, the 7th century BCE. So I'm going to conclude with a commercial announcement. Wednesday night at 7:00 p.m., our own member, Dr. Alan Molk, with his cousin, Robert Shapiro, who wrote this book, Saving Lives, Saving Dignity, are going to do a book and author talk on Zoom at 7:00 p.m. If you need the link, maybe what I'll do is I'll send the link to that when I send you all the recording of today's session. But I really, really want to encourage you to join, because it's an excellent book. It's a short book, which is always nice. It's very much drawn from their experience. They are both emergency room physicians, and they're writing about the experience that they've had seeing families who are unprepared for end-of-life decisions and how the implications of that. So number one, it's a worthwhile book to read. And number two, Alan Molk is a member of our community, and it would be nice to support him as well. So 7:00 Wednesday night, hope to see many of you there for that. Any final words or thoughts?
Have a pleasant week.
Yes, Shavua Tov. Oseh Shalom Bimromav. Huya Aseh Shalom Aleinu. V'al Kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May it be a peaceful week for all of us.
Olam.
Thank you for
May it
having
be a week of healing.
Amen.
Stay well, everybody.
Yes, everyone stay well.